Hello everyone. I'm Sam Jenkins. I'm the Collections Officer at the People's History Museum and founder of the Museum Wellness Network. And I've been on the dole 3 times so far in my life. It feels a bit like you're admitting something at Alcoholics Anonymous when you say that. But it's sort of the point of this talk that there's so much stigma and attitude and mysticism around the welfare state that a lot of us have internalized it. And hopefully through this talk, we can remove some of that and answer some questions that you've got and help you know what to expect if you're going through the welfare system. So some caveats to start with. I'm not a professional advisor. This is all information I found through personal experience or research. So if you have any questions that I can't answer, do look into things yourself. Contact Citizens Advice Bureau if you need more information. The systems do vary slightly between England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. I think it's mostly in payments, but I might be wrong. So feel free, if you're in either Scotland or Northern Ireland, to look into do a bit more research and look into things specifically for you, because this will focus on the system in England and Wales, because that's where I live. And there is also likely to be some swearing in this session because it's personal stories and I'm probably going to get frustrated at some point. So a bit about me. I first signed on in 2012 after finishing my bachelor's. I'd studied in Cardiff, absolutely loved it, and really wanted to stay in the area. Had all these grand plans, as many graduates do, of finding a decent job, which would even just be minimum wage, but full-time, and living with my friends while I saved to do a master's degree, because I was not done with education. And that just did not happen. I very quickly found out that there were a lot of graduates. There was a lot of competition and very, very few jobs in the area. And I was contracted to work in retail for 4 hours a week, and I was regularly getting 20 hours a week, but that wasn't enough to live on. So I applied for Jobseekers, housing benefit and council tax benefit. And it was the first time I learned that job centres don't actually help you that much. In my meeting, basically the only thing my advisor said to me was, you'll be all right. So the shining moment of that first time on Jobseekers Allowance was when I was sanctioned for not attending a meeting because there was only one phone line for the job centre. So I was trying to call up to rearrange the meeting because I'd been offered a 9-hour shift with work. And if you've ever worked in retail, I think a lot of you will know that if you turn down a shift, your managers quite often decide that that means you don't want any. So I needed to go to work for that day, which meant I couldn't attend my meeting and I couldn't get through on the phone to rearrange it. So I essentially got sanctioned for taking a shift. And after around 4 months on Jobseekers, Christmas happened and I managed to get enough working time to sign off, and I just stayed signed off until eventually I gave up and I was able to move back in with my dad. I was lucky enough that my dad had the space in the house and would let me move back in with him, but he didn't really want me there. There's like a whole bunch of family history that you don't need to know, but he agreed that I was able to stay rent-free as long as I was on the dole. So he could keep getting the single person's council tax rates. Once I got a job, I'd either have to pay rent or I'd have to move out. So I signed on and had my second experience with the job centre. And that's where I really learned that they don't treat you as an individual. So I was immediately put into a session to learn how to write a CV. And I already had a CV, I brought it along as was asked, showed it to the instructor who just said, yeah, that's fine, why are you here? The only other person in that CV workshop had 2 GCSEs. So obviously all of the attention was given to him to try and give him a good chance of having a decent CV. I learned at that point that you are going to be treated exactly the same by your advisor, no matter if you've got a degree, a PhD, 10 years of work experience, no work experience, or you've only just passed your GCSEs. The people working at the job centre aren't necessarily horrible people. No, through this talk, it'll sound different, but they aren't horrible people. but their job is to get you off the unemployment stats. It's not to help you find your dream position. I think if you can be prepared for that, it will help in the long run. So I stayed signed on there until I got a position at English Heritage, which I'd applied for before signing on. And I moved up to Lodge just outside Bromley. And my third and hopefully final time of going on the dole was in 2015. So after finishing my master's degree, I'd done my master's through a mixture of saving up by doing basically nothing for a year. And like I was living on the outskirts, on the outskirts of Bromley, and I would spend money on food and £5 a week going to see my sister in London, because that's how much it cost on the tube. And then that was it for an entire year. So I'd managed to save up a fair amount, and I took out a career development loan because student loans weren't offered for master's degrees at the time. So I'd finished my master's and was looking for my first job behind the scenes, looking for working museum collections. And I needed to either get a job or sign on, because the career development loan was just a loan through the bank. So they had a system that if you didn't have a job, then you could sign on and you could defer payments. So that was the other option. If I couldn't find a job, I needed to sign on immediately in the month leeway that I had, to make sure that they weren't going to be expecting £200 a month when I wasn't earning anything. At this time, the country was starting to shift to universal credit. So that brought out all sorts of issues. The dentist I went to didn't have the correct forms for universal credit. They only still had Jobseekers forms. So they tried to charge me, and then they had to do a whole investigation, and I had to get proof from universal credit that I was receiving benefits. That shouldn't happen anymore, because I think the whole country is now under universal credit. But yeah, it was a big learning curve at the time. But in hindsight, it was quite helpful, because it's given me a lot of information that I can hopefully share with you guys. So I finished my degree. I immediately applied for universal credit. And again, my dad was letting me stay until I got a job, as long as I applied for benefits to get the council tax deduction. He was letting me, I had a month to apply for museum specific roles before he was going to force me to just work at a supermarket to pay rent. So universal credit should take about 5 weeks from your application to your first payment. When I applied, that was true, and they said not to contact them in that first 5-week period. So I waited 5 weeks, and I hadn't heard, and I waited and I waited, and eventually I called them because I hadn't heard from them at all, and they discovered that my application had been lost in the system. So I hadn't been assigned a meeting. The next slot was a fortnight away. So it was a bit worrying, but I still had a little bit of savings left. So a few more weeks wouldn't be a huge problem. And then a fortnight later, I go to the job centre and I sign in, and I sit there and I sit there and I sit there. And it's about 45 minutes after the time my meeting was meant to be that I finally realised that it's not that they're running late. Something's wrong. So I asked the security guard, who asked the advisors, and the advisor says I've not got a meeting booked in. He was really condescending and rude and pretty adamant that it was somehow my fault. And I started tearing up, because it's a really stressful time. And then he tells me that there's no need getting upset, which has never helped anyone. But eventually he actually looked into the system and found that the central service apparently hadn't put the meeting in the correct calendar or something. So he sets up a meeting in another fortnight's time. And I went away having to wait another 2 weeks, after at this point having waited 7 weeks from the initial application. I went and spent £3 on a Costa and sat there ugly crying, like completely bawling my eyes out. Until a woman eventually came up to me and gave me a tissue and said, I don't know what's wrong, but I can promise you that it will get better. I've been where you are and it will be okay. And that act of kindness still quite often brings tears to my eyes, because I don't think she will ever know how much that helped. But around 9 weeks of waiting, I finally got my interview for Universal Credit and got my first payment about a week or so later. And the meeting was absolute shit. First off, if you are telling someone in the job centre that you want to work in museums, they will look at you like you've got two heads. If you say you want to work with collections, they think you mean fundraising, and then they will tell you to work with repo companies. Yeah, it was not great. And I think the real lesson from that time was that they do not care about what you want to do. They're convinced that you don't know anything. In the meeting, the advisor told me that I was spending too long on application forms, I wasn't applying for enough jobs, and that I was looking in all the wrong places. So to clarify, I was sending about 3 applications a day, spending about 2 days in total on them, a day writing and a day editing. And I was looking in all the places that I think we would all recommend you look for museum jobs. I was looking at Leicester Job Site, I was looking at museumjobs.com, National Museum Director Council and Guardian Jobs, though that never actually helped. So the advisor decided that what I should have been doing was sending off 5 jobs a day, spending about half an hour on them at most, and get as many off as possible, just send CVs. And that I should be looking in the local paper. I mean, I'm not sure how many jobs are even advertised in local papers anymore. I'm not even sure how many local papers still have a paper. But he was adamant that he knew more than I did. So there was also a great moment when I was asked to go through my work history. I started with the internship I'd just finished and the volunteering I was doing, and then went backwards in time. So volunteer coordinator in front of house at English Heritage. And he said, have you got any experience that was paid? And I was absolutely dumbfounded. Like, first off, that job was paid. And secondly, voluntary experience is still experience, you absolute idiot. So I got a job doing things my way, which is really lucky, and I think does show that if you keep on going, keep on plugging away, you can get there. But it really did hit my confidence, I think, especially the way that they talk to you as if you don't know what you're talking about. He also spent 15 minutes asking every other advisor in the place about a form that I needed filling in for my career development loan payments. Like, he wasn't willing to sign it unless someone else verified that they'd seen one before, which really isn't good when someone's treating you like you're trying to play the system when all you're trying to do is get an approved deferment on a loan. So that's a bit of my history. And I'd like to share some of my experience, some of the lessons I've learned. Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of problem with the screen share here. Right, rearrange that. There we go. So, a few lessons that I've learned. Oh, resume share. I'm sorry about this, guys. I'm just going to stop and try and start again there. What's a Zoom presentation without a few technical difficulties, eh? I promise you it worked when I practiced. Can I check if someone could pop in the chat if you can actually see my presentation?
We can see your presentation, but not on full screen at the moment, Sam.
Okay.
It's like we're seeing your PowerPoint window.
Yeah, I keep on, let's put that down there. Let's try a different way. I'm really sorry about this. Let's do it this way and see if this works. From beginning, should be on the correct screen.
Yep, fabulous.
Great, okay. So some lessons that I've learned. My notes are hidden, so this is a bit off the cuff. But the thing is, the advisors are there to do their job. And as I said, their job is essentially to get you off of the unemployment stats. They aren't there to help you find your dream position, and they will be suggesting things that you think are unsuitable. The advice that they give is very, very generic. They will be giving the exact same advice, no matter what job you'd done previously, no matter how many jobs you've had. And you will probably learn better information about applying for museum jobs this week. So you have to jump through their hoops. You have to fulfill the commitments that you sign up to, and you have to apply for a certain, or spend so many hours, or apply for a certain number of jobs. But trust in your knowledge. Do things your way. A good example is when I was signed on the last time, they asked me to apply for a job that was completely unsuitable. It was transporting glass from based out of a port fairly nearby that would have been about an hour's drive each way for minimum wage part-time. Was not suitable, and applying would have wasted my time and would have also wasted the employer's time. So I sent the CV as I had to, but instead of a cover letter in the email, I essentially said, I am doing this because of a universal credit commitment. Feel free to disregard my application. Also, be aware that this will hit your self-esteem. You are just one person in a long line of job seekers for the advisors, and so they will not treat you as an individual. They will disregard you as an individual, and that will hurt. So try and plan ahead for that. Organise catch-ups with friends to chat, moan or vent. Make sure you keep to a routine if you can. So I really recommend treating the job applications as a full-time job or a part-time job. So do it within the hours of 9 to 5 or whenever you'd normally work. Take breaks, have lunch, and stop at the end of the day. Use museum-specific resources that are available to get good advice. If you're a member of the Museum Association, they do offer career advice. Get in touch with Tams and Russell. And you can use peers and networks that are available. Ask people on Twitter to check through things or lend an ear. There's so many of us who are really willing to help. Just put something out there and see who will get back to you. So some more generic advice. In case you're unaware, the benefit system is now universal credit. I think that is across the whole of the UK now. So universal credit covers pretty much every benefit that used to exist, including Jobseekers Allowance and housing benefit. The only people who get a different system are people who are severely disabled and out of work, are still on a type of Jobseekers Allowance. So universal credit is paid to you monthly. If you're in Scotland, you can ask for it to be paid fortnightly, and it's paid directly to you. So if you're receiving housing benefit as part of universal credit, you get the money and you pass that on to your landlord, which means you do not have to tell your landlord if you're receiving benefits. If you do choose to tell your landlord, if you're renting, of course, if you do choose to tell your landlord, they are not allowed to discriminate against you because you are receiving benefits. That's gone through the courts earlier this year, possibly last year. If they try to, get in touch with housing charities such as Shelter, but you can also threaten to take them to the Ombudsman, which is not only a fun word to say, but with most companies, even the threat of that and sounding like you know what you're talking about is enough for them to shift the way they're talking to you. Be prepared for the 5-week wait. Hopefully nothing will go wrong like it did with mine, but be prepared that it will be 5 weeks between application and receiving your first payment, and it may be longer. So apply as soon as you are eligible. And I would recommend looking into hardship funds as well. So these may count as income for a claim, but there are things like the Museum Association Benevolent Fund. I believe Museum Detox and Museum Freelance have also offered hardship funds this year. If you are living in a couple, you will be counted together. This is one of the worst things about universal credit. If you're out of work and your partner is in work but is earning enough, or you've got combined savings of over £16,000, you will not be eligible. But you will be eligible for the new style job seekers, which is a new benefit that was introduced this year. And that's based off national insurance contributions. I think it's based off of one particular type of national insurance contributions. So some freelancers may not be eligible for that. But definitely have a look into it, because if you are receiving universal credit, you can also receive the new style job seekers on top of that, but it will count as some of your income. So your universal credit will be minimized for that. So when you sign up, you commit to up to 30 hours of job hunting per week. So that may be less if you're working part-time, but as I said, I would recommend you treat that as a job as much as you're able to, especially if you have a standard work or had a standard working pattern of 9 to 5, 9:30 to 5:30, whatever it was. Try and keep the job hunting to within. And the volunteering can count for some of this time of your job hunting commitment because you're learning skills. So you can volunteer for up to 15 hours of this time. You're able to volunteer over 15 hours of that time if you want, but only 15 hours or half of the allotted commitment counts as job hunting. And if you're worried or you want more information, do go to the Citizens Advice Bureau. There are advice bureaus in most towns. You can find them on the website, or you can get in touch online, I think. I will be sharing a link in just a second. So there we have the quick presentation. And hopefully we've got enough time now to get to some questions.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that with us, Sam. I've put a few links in the chat while you were talking about things you were mentioning, which hopefully people might find useful. And we will be saving the chat and sharing all of these resources when we make this recording available. So don't worry if you feel like you've missed something. We've got a few minutes for questions, and one that's been submitted in advance, which you kind of addressed there, talking about volunteering. But are there other things that you can do career development wise that would count as part of that time as well as applying for jobs?
Yeah, I believe that you can do career development as part of that time. So the job centre may try and send you on courses or may want to send you on courses. They quite often do that for people who don't have, who are coming into things either having been in one job for 50 years and they've just been made redundant, or if they're coming in with very little education. But I'd say mention to your advisor if you're thinking of doing a particular career development opportunity, and they probably will be able to count that as part of your commitment. And as I said, the volunteering is able to be part of it as well. So it's likely that it's going to have to count within that sort of 15-hour cutoff, or half the time that you're committed to apply for work. But I think that's a fairly sensible way to approach it anyway, because you do want to give yourself time to fill out actual applications without having to cut into your own personal time as well.
Definitely. This I'm going to sort of merge two questions into one. A question that's just come in the chat about, can you still apply for universal credit if you're working part-time, but also if you're on universal credit and you get a one-off freelance project, for example, what happens?
So universal credit's slightly different to the way job seekers used to work. In job seekers, you could work for a certain amount of time, and then if you were over that time, you were signed off for 2 weeks, and then you had to go through the process of signing on again. Universal credit, however, is a standard system where you stay on universal credit until you hit an earnings threshold. So you can work part-time. If you're earning under the earnings threshold, they will just deduct from the total amount that you could have, which is done in, I think, percentage points after the first £12,000 or something. So working part-time, you won't get the full amount of universal credit, but you will get a certain amount. And the same goes for one-off freelancing opportunities. So if you're unemployed for 3 months and you get the full amount of universal credit, and then your 4th month you get a freelance opportunity, the credit will dip for that month and then it will go back up again once it's over. There's then a system. The way that you stop being on universal credit is when you hit the earnings threshold, I think, for 3 months in a row, then you're removed from the system and you would have to apply again. But hopefully, if that happens, then that means that you're in a stable position and you're in a stable job.
And that also would apply to things like if you're on a 0 hours contract. So I've been helping my mum through a universal credit process this year, and she has been on 0 hours and had some furlough pay, and her universal credit amount has varied each month depending on what that looks like. So there's always an amount, but it's different, which can make things a bit complicated.
Yeah, it can hurt for planning, but it is better than having to sign off and sign on again. It's one of the few things that universal credit is better for.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing this, for sharing your story and sharing all of this information with us. Everyone in the comments has been really appreciative of your time and everything that you've shared. We will, as I said, make sure we share these resources, and we're bringing this session to an end now. It was short but sweet. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending as well. And I will end the meeting shortly.